I think it's easy to initially have some idea of what you want to build in terms of solution, but if you don't keep the problem very clear, then it's very hard to keep evolving there.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to 4-Day Workweek Entrepreneur Podcast. Today, I'm excited to have on, I'm going to try to say this right, Jeroen Kortau. I think that's close. He is the founder of SalesFlare, a CRM system that is taking on the giants. And that's really the theme of our interview today, is how to compete with giants as a small business. And from what I've seen that he's doing, I've seen some of his presentations, what he's up to. And as a software owner, so much of what he's doing is so wise, as far as I can tell, and aligned with what I've seen works and where I've messed up. So I'm excited to have him share with you a little bit about his business and then a lot about what he's learned that can help you with your business. So welcome, Jeroen.
Thank you. It's indeed very close. In Dutch, they say Jeroen. So it's very close.
We'll work with that. Awesome. Thank you. At least it's better than Steve or Joe or something. Not that those are bad names, but at least, it's close.
Yeah.
What I wanted to first do is, could you just tell people a little bit about your business? Because I saw the presentation you did about how to get your clients to fall in love with you and how to grow a business as you're taking on giants. And maybe just tell people a little bit about your business, why you created it and why you're so passionate about it, and kind of why it's been so successful so far.
Yeah. In a nutshell, previous to SalesFlare, I worked in a marketing consultancy that used Salesforce internally. I'm sure most people know Salesforce is the biggest CRM company in the world. For me, it was my very first CRM that I used. So I took it quite seriously. People told me that it would help me organize my sales. So I really tried using it for sales follow-up, but I just didn't completely manage to make it work for me. And I saw that it also didn't really help my sales colleagues. Like our CEO, he really loved it for doing his reporting. But us, the salespeople, we didn't really get much further than entering our sales opportunities in there, basically to report to him. It just didn't help us sell. So it didn't really make sense for us to use it for more than management reporting, which was kind of sad. So I was using things like Outlook and Wunderlist. But I didn't do anything with that insight for a few years until I was working with my current co-founder in another software company. And we had a ton of leads to follow up. We went to a big conference in Vegas, an IBM conference. We were in business intelligence at that point. And I knew that Salesforce wasn't going to help us with that follow-up. So we had a good look around. We tested different CRMs, and many of those were like more practical than Salesforce and better for sales follow-up. But where they still failed time and time again was with us. We didn't manage to fill these systems out like we were expected to fill them out. We just didn't really have the discipline to be these perfect data input robots, you could say. The software really expects you to be, which is weird. And people are okay with that you're sort of a robot, but I don't think most salespeople are these kind of people that can fill out a system like pristine, always perfectly disciplined. So we figured that this is not the way it probably should be. And we thought about the fact that actually all the data we were filling out ourselves, that it was already in other systems. So we were basically duplicating data for no reason. Like the fact that we emailed someone, we were writing like, I emailed the person on that date and we discussed this or whatever. That was already in our email system. The people we were in contact with were in our email system. Their phone number that we're copying from the email signature or the position or whatever, that was also in our email system. And then meetings were in our calendar, phone calls were in our phone. We had email tracking and web tracking that we could integrate. And there was stuff in company databases that we were like combining with it. And there was stuff in social media. So we figured, what if we build a system that sits on top of the data that already exists, that sort of surfaces it for you, makes that you can easily curate it in just a few clicks. And that's 6 years ago now. That's when SalesFlare was born. It's an intelligent CRM that is built on top of existing data that organizes that data automatically, so you don't need to fill out the CRM manually. And it's also, to my very first point, a CRM that actively helps you with following up your customers by keeping track of everything. It provides you overview with a pipeline, and it even automatically reminds you when a certain customer needs follow-up. But basically, our biggest mission when we started Salesforce was to help salespeople focus on their customers with a very easy and automated system so they can perfectly follow up every customer without spending any time on robotic tasks. And that's still our biggest mission today.
Okay, awesome. And yeah, and that's, there's so many things you bring up, and I've had a software company for 20 plus years, not as much on the CRM side, but I work with people in sales coaching on that side. And you kind of run into this challenge that your most detailed people who are willing to fill out these really detailed forms are often your worst salespeople. And then your people who are your best salespeople are constantly complaining that you're making them fill out stuff. And she's like, okay, great. I can get this really great data from people who aren't that effective. So that's not really helpful. And on this other side, I've got these people that are saying, wait, I'm doing it right. I'm getting results. I'm getting what you want. Do you really want me to slow down? And you say, oh God, no, please don't slow down. And it becomes very difficult. It's interesting. There's a book you mentioned in your presentation, which I read. And I, in fact, even asked you when we first talked, if you'd read it, by 37 Signals, the company that creates Basecamp. I think they call themselves Basecamp now, called Getting Real. And it was something for me as a software developer that helped me think more clearly, and even more so, even just as an entrepreneur. And they talked about a couple things that it sounds like you've done, which is one, they talk about scratching your own itch, like addressing that thing that's your pain point because you know it so well. And one of the other things they said, which I loved, which was rather than making 10 solutions or 10 pieces of a software, let's say, that are all 10% good, just make one 100% good, and then eventually add another. Would you share with that? Because for me as a software developer, that's you're narrating something that I'm very familiar with, and people would say, well, how do you compete with people? And first of all, I can't fully compete at their same game. I can't compete with a person that's 100 times my size, but I can innovate and I can be different and I can hit something that they don't do. And I think as entrepreneurs, whether you're a company of 50 to 100 people or 500 people, or just starting out, it's that whole thing of what can I do that nobody else can do that is unique? How did you all leverage that? And how were you able to know what those things were that you were supposed to do?
Yeah. So the problem that I was outlining before is what we started with. So we completely focused on that. We built something first that was sitting on top of your email inbox, and that would basically detect when you had new contacts, detect when your colleagues had new contacts, visualize that, make email timelines. That was the very first product. What we found out is that it wasn't super useful by itself. It needed to become something that did more than that also integrated other types of data, that had this nice pipeline through which you could track stuff, that sent you reminders to follow up. We actually read Getting Real when we first got started, and we were very convinced that this was the way to go. Unfortunately, we were, initially we thought we were playing in a sales platform sphere, but in the end we were playing in a CRM sphere, and there was so much more expected from us to actually have something that we could sell, that it took quite a while to get on par kind of with other systems. So as much as we started with thinking the Getting Real way, we had to go much further with our product. That being said, we always try to build it up in such a way that we focus only on building the core very much ourselves, and then try to get pieces together, just like open source frameworks, maybe an external infrastructure for something. That then along the way we started replacing some of these things, but just to get much quicker to that MVP, not really, more like instead of minimum viable product, that minimum sellable product or minimum lovable product. that was a quite a challenge for us, I must say. But for most products, I would say that the getting real thinking is very very good. I definitely recommend that above um, building a huge system and then finding out that nobody wants to buy it.
Great. So one of the things that I'm wondering if you could share about is how did you know then? So you said you had this first part of a product, and again, I encourage people to think, you know, as somebody who's built software before, it's always, of course, and you mentioned this when you and I were talking. It's about the problem. It's not about your solution. Nobody really cares about your
Mm-hmm.
solution. As I tell people in my sales coaching, nobody cares about my sales coaching or my software. In my case, mine is a software to motivate people to sell more. Like, you want the people to sell more. If I had magic brownies, you'd buy my magic brownies. You don't really want software. You want
Mm-hmm.
the outcome. How did you know it wasn't yet a product? And I think I know the answer, but just even to explain to people as you're going development, because it can be discouraging, I think, for people when they say, okay, well, I thought this was it, and I put it out there, and you know, maybe people are telling you, oh, that sounds great, or your friends and your family, yeah, that's great, but nobody's yet committing financially. Or how did you know
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't yet a business? And then what did you have to do? How did you go through that process to then say, okay, here are the pieces that we need to put in, here are the functions, here, whatever it is that we need to get to first, and how did you prioritize that from a development
Yeah.
standpoint or from an offer standpoint?
Yeah, very early on. So we had this vision of what we wanted to build. We saw a big issue and we thought, okay, that's where we want to go. But then we took a few steps back, at least after a few months. And I started doing customer interviews. So basically, first went to my network, saw who was relevant, made a list of questions, started asking like, what do you sell? Who do you sell it to? What are your challenges? What are your challenges with software when it comes to selling? You know, like trying to understand the whole issue. I think we did 30, 40 customer interviews. First start with our network, and then every time we interviewed, we also asked like, who else should we talk to? And then like that, expanding on the network, the direct network at least. And that was a very good exercise to understand what the biggest frustrations were. Um, we had a little bit of an issue there, is that we got so much advice, not only from these customer interviews, but we're also in an accelerator and we had all these mentors and all, and everybody had their opinions. And it was a challenge for us to like bring it back to the essence. Like, we understood everything, uh, but when you're building something, you can only focus on so much that you're going to build first. So we struggled for a couple of months with that, but then in the end, returned to what we had in mind, but with all the context. We started with the very essential features from our own perspective and our own and these customer interviews, because in the beginning we didn't have users, not even people actively using it. We didn't have customers for sure. So in the beginning, it was based on this research and our own sort of vision. After a while, as we started getting users on the platform, we could then send out surveys. Like, when we had, let's say, 20 users or something, and some people trying it and stuff, we didn't have like a whole lot of people to ask questions to. So we had to go very far in asking for feedback. As things progressed, we don't really do that much of that anymore. I mean, I still did some customer interviews, for instance, last December with our 20 of our top 40 customers. We still do a survey now and then, but we don't have to go as far with these things, because we just get a massive amount of feedback rolling in every day, which we organize, link back to the people who asked it, send it into our prioritization model and all that. So that really changes from the very beginning. You really need to beg for feedback, and after a while, it's more about like, how do we keep this organized and how do we make sure that like the right things are being worked on. from all the things that people are asking.
Yeah, absolutely. I know as a developer you get, and as a coach too, you get so many suggestions from people and it can be very difficult to understand which ones you should act upon. And like you said, initially you're just trying to beg people to give you feedback. And then after a while, if you're not careful, you'd say, well, oh wait, you know what? I don't want to listen to the questions that are coming in. I'm going to do a survey. It's like, no, the questions that are coming in, that is your feedback. That's what they want. And that was something that took me a while to learn. And it was a lesson I learned specifically in my software business, but I also learned it in my coaching business. Remember the first year I had went out and I did some demos and I'd sold this software, and it's an annual subscription type software. And I hadn't gotten a lot of questions. People seemed to be getting it. And so I assumed that if I had no questions coming in, that they got it. And I see, I can always see you laughing. So then a year later, when I go and see who's ready to renew, and 50% of them were not ready to renew. I'm like, whoa, what happened? I thought everything was okay because they didn't reach out to me. And then I had to realize that, at least, especially initially, I had to really go out of my way and make sure that line of communication was open and that they felt comfortable to be able to connect with me. And I'm thinking of some of what you said in your presentation about just whether it's through LinkedIn, through Facebook, through just opening things in a way to say, no, I really do want to hear your feedback. And I know I've told people over the years, look, you're not doing me any favors by not giving me feedback. You're actually hurting me. So please don't feel like you're being annoying. I'll always tell you, if you reach a point where you're annoyed, I'll tell you. But until then, you're helping me to realize, because a lot of people will just quietly say nothing and they'll leave. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things. You know, sometimes you go into a retail store and you can tell every once in a while you'll find somebody that's so attuned to your needs, and you say, you're the owner, aren't you? Oh yeah, I'm either the owner, because there's this level of concern of how do you feel that's very different than an average employee. Tell me something, because this is the toughest part. I know, as somebody who's taken advice from a lot of mentors, and you reach that point where you say, okay, I want to be humble because these people are smart in some way or they're successful in some way, but I've got to listen to my voice. How did you and your partner, how did you all figure out, okay, these are the things you mentioned? Some of it was what you knew was important, but how did you make that distinction? Because I think that's one of the toughest things, is this overwhelm, because there's so many coaches. There's now even so much free content out there that you can have two people that are really successful saying different things. And at least on the surface, it sounds like they're contradictory, but very often it's that one person's at one stage or has a different perspective. How did you all make that decision to decide, okay, no, we're going this way, and these things might be great, but we're going to put them aside from now? How were you able to do that?
Is this about the product feedback, or is it just general
Even
advice?
just the business, the decisions of the business, or specifically how to, like you mentioned, at one point you thought it was mainly a sales system, and then you realize there's more of a CRM. Like, how do you make those decisions? Because those are pretty big decisions to be able to say, especially if you're marketing, and definitely if you're developing code or building out coaching programs or products or anything. You mentioned the idea of making sure there's some interest before you go too deep into it. How do you confirm that?
I guess both in product and other decisions, there's two things that are really important. One, how does it align with what we're trying to do? How does it align with our vision? We have that in mind. We have something written down somewhere. We can go there and say, okay, so we're trying to do this. How does this align? And second, is what is the impact going to be in our business? And that's something we do with features or improvements or this kind of things as well. Like, are more people going to sign up for trials? Are more people on the trials actively going to use it? Are more of these people that actively are using it? Are more of those going to subscribe, and so on? Are more people going to keep using it? So we look at all these things, and we're looking like, is this actually going to have an impact somewhere across our funnel, let's say? And that is the case with all decisions. And then there's, of course, a question of how sure are we about how we're scoring it? Some things we just have to try, and then it depends sort of on the amount of work it is. If it's not too much work, we could just try it and see what happens. Maybe something interesting happens. That could be, So.
Cool. All right. So one of the things I want to go a little bit deeper into with you is this concept you and I talked about being passionate about the problem rather than the solution. And I know to some people that might sound a bit negative, but I'll again relate simply to what I experienced is when I left a paying job and decided to start my own business. I thought I was going to be a coach. That was my first thing, a coach slash consultant. And I was going to help people grow their businesses. And I was going to help these small business owners motivate their team members to sell more. So I was actually pretty clear about what I was going to do, but I thought the intervention was going to be coaching and talking with people. And I did some of that. And then one of the people said, hey, you know what? Our software is kind of weak. We don't really see when we make bonuses or if it makes a big deal or not. Can you create something that would help us see the numbers? Because we believe if we saw the numbers, we'd get excited about it. And so ironically, 20 years later, over 80% of my income has come from something I didn't expect to create. And yet, thank God, somehow I was able to hear through this. I guess part of it too is it just wasn't working. I wasn't getting the clients. So I'd kind of reached that point of desperation, say, okay, well, I'm doing these interviews, but people don't really want to change, or maybe they do, maybe they don't. And that doesn't hold across the board. But in my case, it was that the problem was the problem had not changed, but what I thought was the solution wasn't the solution. How has that helped you without necessarily being negative, but again, finding that problem you're passionate about and not falling in love with the solution? How do you explain that to people who are perhaps new at something, or maybe even trying to pivot or shift what they're doing?
Yeah, I think it's easy to initially have some idea of what you want to build in terms of solution, but if you don't keep the problem very clear, then it's very hard to keep evolving there. So what we do is we see an issue like people are not using their CRM. It doesn't help to follow up customers, and they don't fill it out. And in the end, they're not closing deals and customers are disappointed. So that's sort of the issue. But there's so much to do there. And if you would just think like, okay, like 6 years ago, we think up a solution and then stop there, that would be a pity. And like as you were explaining, you thought coaching was the solution. You figured out software as a solution, but it might be that at some point your software sort of becomes obsolete because there's other stuff, and the problem sort of is still the same, but the solution shifts. If you keep focused on the problem, then you can deal with that. If you are like only into the solution, then you'll miss that. And at some point you become irrelevant. Just focusing on a problem makes that you can actually find the right solution and that you can stay relevant with that solution, evolve it. Like the problem that we're focusing on, for instance, is so big. Our solution is not finished at all. Like, yes, it helps people, but there's so much more that we can do that to make sure that people actively use their CRM more, like that they can follow up better, that we're thinking about all kinds of things we can automate in sales, enormous amount of stuff to do. And that's because the problem is fundamental and also quite big, let's say.
Awesome. Yeah. One of the things that you mentioned in one of the slides that I saw was you put out the cost of, I think it was 611 billion or something like that, of the cost of data not being used properly. Because if you think about it, any just basic sales funnel, well, if you don't make your sales calls, well, that's real simple. You're not going to make sales. All that's going to happen is whatever was coming in the door because of the marketing efforts of the company, which marketing being more of that generic company approach as opposed to the one-to-one sales. So to a certain degree, you've really almost grounded or made inoperable your sales group if they can't get to that data, or if they're not willing to use the data, or if they can't connect to it, or if there's technology, whatever it might be. One of the things that I'm wondering how you all do this, because I know this is something that's always key to this, is how do you help the client see to them what it's worth? Because I know most people, I mean, nobody really wants to spend money. Hopefully you want to invest money. If you read a book or do a coaching program or buy a software, you're hoping that if you put in $10 that you're going to get $100 back. Or if you put in an hour that it's going to save you 5 hours. Let's say it's a productivity book or whatever it might be. How do you help your clients see that even though your system is not yet perfect, it's still a big improvement. And so it's worth it for them to stay in the game with you, and that it's still an improvement. How do you deal with that, the progress versus perfection aspect of a business?
Yeah.
When in software, people want perfection. They want it, I want it to have this, this, this. And it's like, well, hold on, what's the most important things? How do you all do that? Because you mentioned a lot what it costs you in time. If you misestimate, or if you are incorrect in your estimate, you could spend, as you know, weeks, days, months programming something, and the client say, I really didn't do anything for me. How do you all help the client see what it's cost them, and then help them understand that, yes, what we're doing is making an impact for you?
Yeah. I must say, on the numeric level, we don't really have anything there. I think it differs very much per customer. What I usually say is like, okay, so for instance, they're choosing versus another CRM, or they're considering going to another one because it has this next to it or something. It's a bigger system. And then I'm like, yes, okay, but what if your salespeople stop using the CRM? What is that going to cost? How's the sales follow-up going to go? All the things that you're trying to do, like somebody is sick, somebody goes away. How are all these things going to work? And then mostly people get the problem. On the numeric level, I think I only had one customer telling me like that they're three people using the software, and their sales follow-up is so much better that they now earn $1 million more per year just by following up better. And funny then also when Corona came around, they were like one of the first ones to say like, okay, we need to save costs. We're going to cancel our Salesforce subscription. And I'm like, wait a minute, you told me you're selling 1 million more per year, and they're spending 3 times 35 a month, so 105 per month. You're gonna take that, decision? And they're like, yeah, no. They're still on the software. So
Awesome. Yeah, and that's the thing, and especially on, well, not just the software side, the coaching side, any intervention. I think about how things were marketed 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and everything, because technology was so new, people were so wanting to show you, look, my widget has 25 functions. It can do this, this, this. It's this Swiss Army knife. And if you look at, let's say, the way Yahoo search used to be set up versus when Google came out and had the one, the white page with the box in the middle, and that simplicity. And one of the things that I always try to remind my customers is, yeah, a great solution that's not implemented is worth zero. And I think that applies to anything in complexity. When people say, Wade, you're sales coaching, how many lessons do you have? I said, it's not how many lessons I have. You have 5 main conversations we need to have your team members be making, or you making. And if you get those 5, that's like 80 to 90% of the issue. The other 50 videos I have or conversations I have are not worth more, or only worth, a tenth of what that is. And so helping somebody realize what that core is, and certainly knowing that, because I think one of the things people forget when they get involved in sharing a solution with somebody, and you said this so right, I think, as far as falling in love with your solution. I can think of how many times I've wanted to fall in love with the software that I have now, that I'm like, okay, this is so great. But then now I do need some coaching with it. There's a balance of certain things. And, again, making sure that I state, well, why are they paying me? They're paying me because they want to make sure that this thing that they don't have, that they get it, or that this thing that they have, that they continue to get it, or that it improves. And that's something for me, especially in a residual business model. I think about this idea of just making sure that somebody continues to get that result. And like you said, with the people who are thinking of canceling, people can become a little short-sighted. And whether it's, well, how many sales calls did you make before and how many did you make now? That's sort of a more indirect relationship, just using that as one variable. But of course, the money, that and impacting lives are, for most people, if you hit one of those 2 variables, or probably both, you've pretty much hit everything that it comes down to. And I think that's the part that a lot of people lose sight of, because it's so easy to get caught up in our own solutions. And especially, I love creating stuff and it's pretty, and my software's got colors, and it's so beautiful, but nobody gives a damn if it doesn't do what they need it to. And so something that you mentioned that in your presentation, you and I talked a little bit about it, was before you scale something, having that sense of, okay, I'm going to try this first. I'm going to make sure I get it accurate, and then I'm going to build it. And again, I'm going to take it or ask you to take it to a little bit of a generic conversation, not just software, because I think sometimes when people hear software people, they say, oh, you're just talking software. Like, no, we're actually, it applies to any sort of solution. How do you do that sense of trying something, then nailing it and then building it? And how do you know when you've nailed it that you're ready to build it and then perhaps even scale it?
Yeah, well, that applies to so many levels. It applies, for instance, to not hiring before you understood a certain job. Like if you haven't done the marketing job yourself first, then you don't know what you're gonna need to hire for, what that specific person needs to do, because there's so much in marketing. Or if you haven't sold your product first, how can you hire a salesperson and train them to do it? So that's certainly one level where it applies. You just do it yourself until you understand it. You're like, okay, I mean, I'm sort of, I can do it, but somebody else might want to take it over, and I can explain that might be the moment where you go from nailing the thing to scaling it. But it often also it is, for instance, on an automation level. Like there's so many things we used to do manually, like going through our list of customers, seeing which ones are the ones that are using well, making sure we're following up well, sending messages like, hey, how's it going? And then starting to figure like, hey, we're always sending the same messages, like, and maybe this first message we can automate. And then from there, we'll pick up when people reply. That saves us an enormous amount of time. Most of our follow-up is actually automated. It looks personal, but the first thing is automated. And then when people reply, we are there to pick up. Let me think about other...
Okay, jump in on that, because I think that's something that some people forget is, I think there's developed an etiquette to what people will allow you to automate and what they won't. So if, like, for example, if I have a webinar coming up, people expect that I'm not sending individual emails. They'd almost wonder, wait, are you okay? But then when they respond to a certain thing, then they want that personal touch.
Exactly.
So I think people sometimes, I used to get caught between, like, I can't automate everything. And I think people have this nightmarish vision of the marketer that sends you an email every single day, and this almost feels like it's too much, as opposed to, hey, we're checking in. You can automate the check, at least in my experience, the check-in email. Hey, how's everything going? And still have that be there, that's better than not asking. And then when they respond, well, then yes, you get, like you said, you can respond to them. So I think people can balance that. They almost feel like they either have to go all personal touch or technology, but I think there's places you can automate, and you're not trying to automate the relationship. It's like you're automating the scheduling or the opportunity for the relationship to grow. And then the person can either opt in or not. But I think that's an important thing, because I know I struggled with that, because I was so wanted to have this high touch business and struggle with how to make it high tech. So sorry, I just wanted to, I just thought that was
that
relevant.
totally
It sounds like y'all are doing that.
Yeah. It's like you cannot automate things in a way that will make you less human to the other person. So you try to automate things that when you're doing it, you feel less human. Like you're basically you have a list, and then you're going through them and send the same message over and over again. If you find yourself doing that, then you probably better automate it. You can better leave that to the computers, let them do it at scale, personalize with the first name, I don't know what, all those kind of things. But you still need to keep it to such a level that on the other side, the person feels like, okay, this might be automated, but it speaks to me. If you sort of start forgetting that, then yeah, that hurts as well. And that's why you also first need to do it manually, because when you're doing it manually, you can really use your empathy in a much better way. When you automate something right away, it's very hard to do that. You might start thinking about people as numbers or units or something. It's very unpersonal. While if you've done it many times personally with someone, at some point you can feel how it should be done, and then is a good moment to automate it. So that's also something that speaks to try it first and nail it then, and then scale it.
Absolutely. I've even found in some of my things, I'll say, look, this is a mass email. I'll even say it sometimes, I'm sending this, but I'm asking
Mhm.
for how I can serve you. And so if I'm asking them for something that is going to benefit me, I find that I have to get a lot more personal and perhaps even more an individual email. But if I'm offering something and saying, hey, I'm not sure if all of y'all are interested, I'm automating this, but once you reply. So I think there's ways you can do it if that feels uncomfortable. Something that I liked that you mentioned in your presentation, I'm going to kind of go a little bit, at least in the order for presentation,
Yeah.
was solving a problem for your people and people that you
Hmm.
understand, people that you get, and being okay with not only that you're not going to help everybody in the world, but that you really maybe can't help everybody. Again, I think a lot of people feel, well, Wade, I want to help everybody, and my solution could help everybody. And it would be mean for me to say that I don't want to help certain people. But at the same time, if we try to help everybody, different people perceive the world different ways. How do you know if somebody's your people? And again, this is not meant in a
Yeah.
mean, discriminatory way. This is meant in as just people who get you, that when you
Hmm.
connect, they're going to say, yes, I totally get this, as opposed to you having to learn somebody's culture or the way they view the world or their business culture. How do you know who are your people, the people that are really going to resonate with you and respond, and that you should even listen to more, as opposed to those that perhaps are not those?
I think it starts from looking at your own background, looking at your own network. For instance, I have my background in healthcare, first of all, in engineering, and then I went into a marketing agency. I built websites since I was 15, 16. So these are all things I sort of can identify with. I also went to business school. So there's all different backgrounds. It's all different sort of networks. Um, so automatically your thinking comes from there, and you can better understand these people. It's easier in the beginning to find people that are right for your solution, people that have the problem that you're focusing on. That's very handy. It's much easier on the longer run to understand these people as well. Plus, you might also like talking to these people more, as opposed to some people that you enjoy talking less with, which is very important as well, because you need to have that very sort of as I mean, like close and good communication with people, so that you can actually improve your solution to the problem um, more and more and more, and make the experience you're offering with your product or service as much as possible. um, but I think it just to get back to what you asked, it starts with looking who you are yourself, and I think a lot will come from there.
Yeah, because I hear a lot of people say, well, if you're going into a new market, you study, you go into forums, you hear what do they say, how do they talk, what words
Mm.
do they use, and I think there's some value to that. But if you already understand that and it's already just second nature to you, that's one step less, and you might later go there. As somebody who's been in the insurance field for 35 years and an entrepreneur for 20 years, there's so many things that are just easier to me. And I sometimes would joke with my wife, well, the insurance industry keeps coming back and finding me, and, as if I'm trying to run away, and I'm not. But it's so clear, because even something as simple as, the 4-day work week, which I'm working to now help entrepreneurs in all areas do, I can do that so much better for the people I've been working with for 15 years longer, that I know their insurance agency business so much tighter. And it doesn't mean I can't provide value to the second group, but ultimately there's so many more ways I can do that, and it's made it easier. And I think one of the things that, going back to what we talked about, is kind of the theme of this, is how do you compete with people that are bigger?
Hmm.
Well, to me, it's the whole quality versus quantity concept. And if you really can provide a
Definitely.
certain experience, if you can be engaged with them, the relationships, the connections, so that you're continuing to build value, you're continuing to be able to grow, uh, that those are so important. How do you all make sure that you're building, that you're growing, that you're adding value and creating a culture that's going to support that? so that you're not just hoping that what happened yesterday is going to happen tomorrow?
Yeah. Uh, Part of that is staying very close to customers, is a bit what you explained earlier. I try to connect on LinkedIn with everyone that signs up to the software, try to have conversations with them. We are available on the chat always. We're active in communities. Trying to be very close to the customers is certainly one part there. So because that's one of the essential things you're doing, especially in a software company. It's one is talking to customers, and the other thing is building. And to the building part, the way we try to stay consistent there and try to keep building value is we've built habits for ourselves. So we define, for instance, that we make now we're at about 2 features per month we're trying to hit. One onboarding improvements, one support approach improvements, an SEO article, being visible at least 2 times outside our own audience. Like we have this list of things that we're trying to hit on a monthly basis, so that we build some consistency in the value that we're building on all the levels that we have defined are important for us. And that we don't forget any of these things either. So we have an overview and we're like, okay, are we on a monthly basis really like improving on all these points?
That's awesome. That's something I know at times I've tried to do and haven't done. And when I've done it, I've done so much better. I think of even a simple example, something as simple as either being on a podcast that is going to be a big deal, or being having a speech somewhere that's a big deal, or getting an opportunity that feels like bigger than normal for somebody. Well, if you only do one podcast interview per year, well, there's a lot of pressure on that one podcast interview. If you only add one feature per year, there's a lot of pressure on that. Whereas if you're constantly doing it in a flow, and this is probably one of the areas I do struggle with, but when I do it, I remember, and I guess there's that sense that sometimes the next feature's got to be the next best, greatest feature ever created. And no, it doesn't. It's just kind of like showing somebody, yes, I'm still, like, even to the client, I'm still interested in you being a client. I'm still looking to develop for you. I'm still in the game. I'm still engaged. Ironically, good marriage advice. But I'm still, you're still important to us. I think that's something that when my clients see that, makes a big impact. And then, yes, once in a while, there'll be some interview or some article or something I have that then gets higher than average traffic or higher than average clicks, but I wasn't desperately waiting on it. I was building those habits. And so that's something I think if you can get the team members to do that, the people that work with you to do that, that's huge. Tell me a little bit, if you don't mind, just about your team, how you grew your team and how you've maintained that commitment for them to want to have a culture of growth and to want to keep contributing.
That starts by, first of all, I think hiring the right people. You need to find these people that are interested in growing. We've made mistakes there in the past, like hired the wrong people that are not interested in growing. But right now, I think we have a team where everyone is really committed to this, like growing on a personal level and growing on a company level. It has sort of different levels to it. We have all kinds of things in place where we, for instance, it all starts with having a culture where everybody can say what's wrong with things very openly, that we can discuss things. That's where it all starts. But then you build in the habits, like I was saying earlier, that you consistently build things. But then next to that, that's sort of an we're going to improve all these things sort of level. But then there's all these things behind that you also need to discuss. And for that, we have bi-weekly team meetings where we discuss all the things that went wrong in the last 2 weeks, all the things that went well in the last 2 weeks. For the things that went wrong, we define solutions that we discuss as a team. And for the things that went well, we try to learn why, and so that we can repeat it. And then we also have, for the personal level, we have monthly one-on-ones. So every month we sit together and we see like, okay, how can we do better as a team, but then discussing on a one-on-one basis, and as a person, and as a collaboration. How can all these things improve on a consistent basis? Where is it not going so well, and how can we solve that? We also make space for these things, which is important, because if you don't, then you very easily get in this sort of flow of doing stuff and always doing, but without really taking a moment to discuss what you need to do, what you need to improve, and you get off track, you stop improving, you get stuck in a rut somewhere. There's a lot of problems occurring when you don't do these sort of things.
Awesome. It's funny. I noticed that one of the books you mentioned was The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People that you've read. And as somebody who's read that so many years ago, it's, when you see something that works, I definitely think what you said is so true about hiring. And I was going to ask you, but you already said it. What is one of the determinants between whether somebody you think you'd like to hire or not? And I think you nailed down one that I don't think I've ever verbalized to people, but I've witnessed it, which is, are they personally growing? I think of the sales coaching. There's people I coach, and outside of their boss paying to be trained by me, they don't read any books on sales.
Yeah.
You're not going to grow. And, and then, or even just personal growth, of any sort of personal growth, just that whether it's the flavor that you agree with or not, just that this is somebody that's a student that wants to learn, that wants to keep getting better. Awesome. Thank you. Question: where can people find a little bit more about your work, the CRM, and then also a little just about what you do? Because from talking with you, I think you're going to find, I could be wrong, I think you're going to find more and more people end up wanting to also hear not just about your CRM, but your message, because as somebody who's been doing software for 20 plus years, there's bits of wisdom you have that I think a lot of people are missing, and they translate. I'm going to actually go back and update some of the stuff that I do. But where can people learn about you? And then how can they hear about SalesFlare and all the different ways they can connect with you?
Yeah. Okay. About SalesFlare, that's easy. It's salesflare.com, and Flare is with Flare. So there you can find out all about the software. You can sign up for a trial if you like, see the software, all these kind of things. Then in terms of content that we create, that comes on blog.salesflare.com, which you can also find a link from the main site. There we publish articles on all kinds of topics related to sales, but also things in general for startups and agencies, which is sort of the target group we're focusing on. All kinds of things that we learned or that we want to share on how to improve things. On the founder level, I get on some podcasts, so you can always listen to podcasts with me, but I try to actually get similar pieces of wisdom from fellow SaaS founders or software as a service founders on my podcast, which is called Founder Coffee. And that's on foundercoffee.salesflare.com. Because there are so many things that founders don't really talk about. Often things are on a technical level, and there's all these underlying things that somehow are never talked about, and that's something I try to expose on my podcast.
Oh, that's awesome! I didn't do that. I could definitely see that, because sometimes there's such the focus on the tool, and the rest of the stuff kind of matters. If people aren't interested in your service or what it is you're building, it might not matter how great your software widget is.
Exactly.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you so much. For those of y'all who are not in the software business, hopefully you're able to get a lot out of this. In case you might or might not realize, I'm just going to highlight it. 90% of what he said applies to software business, coaching business, sales business, whatever it might be. And I really encourage you all to continue. And in fact, find him on LinkedIn. I don't think he's going to kick you out if you connect with him on LinkedIn.
No, but add a note, please, because otherwise I think it's, I need to distinguish you from someone who's trying to sell.
Yes, you heard it on the greatest podcast on earth, the 4-Day Workweek Entrepreneur podcast,
exactly.
And then he'll know. But yes, so thank you so much for coming out. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us. And I hope you all can reach out, see what he's adding, because again, as always, my job is to help you all figure out how you can help more people, make more money in less time, do what you do best. And there's a lot of things he's mentioned here that I think can help you do that. So thank you all for listening. Hope you enjoy this episode. And always look forward to helping you create the life and the lifestyle you most desire so you can better enjoy your family, your friends, and your life. Thank you.